Mr Field's been wrestling with the problems of running the welfare state. Today, after nearly a year as a Social Security Minister, he's unveiling a possible way forward.
This is a document for 10 or 20 years. And what we are hoping to do is for people towards the end of that period, that they will see that from this document the most decisive changes took place.
50 years since Sir William Beveridge's blueprint for a welfare state was enacted by a Labour government, a new Labour administration is saying there has to be change, for example, pensions. And here on a housing estate near his own Merseyside constituency, Mr Field believes he's seen the way forward. Self-help rather than relying on the state. With no banks here, a group of young mums started pooling their savings for a children's holiday. They're now involved in running the thriving Speak Credit Union. The government hopes in future people will save for their pensions through groups like this.
We're excluded financially, and some would say socially, and any help we can give to making life a little bit better for our members, we'd certainly get alongside any such initiative.
As well as outline principles, today's government paper will set success targets like cutting the number of workless households and the number of unwanted teenage pregnancies. But with pensioners demonstrating at Westminster this morning, there are still fears the process is motivated by Treasury-driven spending cuts. The Tories say Mr Field must be more specific about when the targets can be achieved.
To be honest with the public, he needs to say exactly when will they be measured on these things. In 2 to 3 years' time? Or is he trying to spin them beyond the next election and hope they don't get punished for it?
Ministers will stress this afternoon the only cuts they want to see are in levels of benefit fraud. But there's been a reminder of the scale of the task they face today, with an all-party group of MPs in this report suggesting that housing benefit fraud is now out of control and running at nearly £1,000 million. Hugh Pym, ITN, Westminster.
Well, our political editor, Michael Brunson, is in Westminster now. Michael, we were hearing just then that there are suspicions that the whole exercise is being driven by the Treasury, its desire for spending cuts. Would that be fair?
Well, that is part of it, but one reason why the government doesn't stress it is that the last thing they want to do is to frighten off those pensioners. There is a great deal, as you know, of uneasiness up and down the country that the whole thing is about cuts. But what the government are saying is that what is driving them above all is the simple arithmetic, that each year, despite some cutbacks in the rate of spending by the last Conservative government, each year, on average, the spending on welfare goes up and up and up. And yet there are still more people in poverty than there used to be. And this thing seems to go on just like a steamroller. And so what they're going to try and do in this green paper is to set out a way forward that they think can map out how that almost inevitable rise in both poverty and welfare spending can be turned around. But at the end of that process, there's no doubt that the government does expect that money will be saved.
Now, we've been hearing this phrase, the contract with Britain, being used by the government. What exactly does that mean?
I think what they're trying to show there is that they genuinely want to change the way people think about welfare. The idea that it is just something that is handed out and there it is, or put another way, ending the idea that anybody can simply sit at home and receive their giro check without doing anything. Now, the idea is that in the Green Paper, it will be set out that the government, for its part, gives certain guarantees. It guarantees to educate you properly, it guarantees to look after your health, and it also guarantees to help you with training and to give you opportunities when those opportunities are needed. But on the other hand, the government is saying it is up to you, Mr. and Mrs. Citizen, to do your part, that you should work when you can work and that you should provide for your family when you can provide for your family. If you can't do those things, yes, we will come in and look after you. But that's the bargain that ought to be struck, the contract between the citizen and the state.
Michael Brunson, thanks very much.
Well, now our Home Affairs editor, Jennifer Nadel, joins me now. Jennifer, we've heard the politics there. What about reaction from the people these changes will affect?
Well, I think as Mike was saying, there is a danger that they could create fear. I mean, any talk of changing the welfare state does generate an enormous amount of concern. But actually, these changes, we're talking about 10 or 15 years for them really to bite. So I think the message is there's not going to be any big bang. These are going to happen very gradually over 1 or possibly 2 generations. Although that in itself does have its own danger because you create expectations, you know, but these promises of jam tomorrow, many people will still be sitting with their problems for quite some time. So there, the challenge is going to be resisting that political imperative to act soon and actually sit it out and go for the wholesale reform which many people feel is needed.
And a lot of principles and aspirations around today, but practically, is there much advice on what exactly people are meant to do to help themselves?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric at the moment, but I think the idea is encouraging people to do what they can for themselves, to work when they can, so that the welfare state really is only there as a safety net. Hugh Penn mentioned in his package the idea of credit unions, you know, that people are going to be more willing to save if they do it in smaller groups. They're going to be less likely to default on loans. Finding new mechanisms to encourage saving and encouraging people to do what they can, and also on the issue of incapacity and sickness benefit, rather than writing people off totally, saying, OK, you can't work in this field, but maybe there are other jobs you can do. So to really make everyone feel that they do have an active role to play.
Jennifer, thanks a lot.
You may remember during the recent crisis in the Gulf, we reported on how the crew on board HMS Invincible still hadn't celebrated Christmas because their tour of duty had been extended. Well, today, at last, HMS Invincible sailed into Portsmouth to a huge welcome. From Portsmouth, our defence correspondent Kevin Dunn reports.
She should have sailed up the Solent in December for a Christmas homecoming, but the crisis with Iraq meant the carrier HMS Invincible was sent first to the Mediterranean and then to the Gulf. She sailed home on a grey, wet morning, but the welcome from the families of the crew members was a bright and warm one. Missing Christmas had been a low point for them all. Many presents were still to be exchanged.
This was a low point? Yeah, it was a low point, yeah. Away from the family, the children. It's the first time I've ever been away from them, so it was a low point.
I think everyone was shocked and everyone was really upset to start off with. And then it's a case of, well, we're all here. Yeah, let's make the most of it.
I've got 3 kids waiting for me on the jetty, and it's going to be a fantastic reunion, and everyone's really excited.
The Defence Secretary, George Robertson, went aboard Invincible for the last leg of her long voyage and commended the ship's contribution towards diffusing the crisis.
The decision on carriers is one that will have to be taken, and we'll bear in mind the experience of the fact that this was the right ship in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, not just for Britain but for the world as well.
After 7 months at sea, this is the moment every member of Invincible's crew has been waiting for. So too their families on the quayside. She seemed to take an eternity to dock, but at last the wives and sons, mothers and children were able to get on board. At last came the reunions they had hoped for, waited for weeks. Kevin Dunn, ITN, Portsmouth.
Well, we're going to take a